Please give us your perspective of what Black Liberation Theology means to you, both in action and in theory. Please make it relevant to our day-to-day life and our current modern society. Please give us your perspective of what Black Liberation Theology means to you, both in action and theory. Please make it relevant to our day-to-day life and current to our modern society, starting with Dr. Walker.
My understanding of liberation theology is an affirmation of who I am. I was created a black man by God. And for me, it's contextualized. I've lived in the black community all of my life. My ancestors come through the trail of slavery and sharecropping. And they had a theory, they had a hope that they would create persons in their family who would promote freedom, who would promote a sense of independence, to move a generation ahead, to move beyond where they were. So with that, liberation theology, a black theology for me, is simply an affirmation of who I am. I'm a black man who believes in God and believes in the miracles of God, but also who's working to enlarge God's economy. Because when God created the earth, and God said it was good. And God also created us as humans to care for God's creation and to care for each other. And so the action part for me is understanding who I am. I have a responsibility to also care for God's creation, which means to create harmony and to create procreation or recreation among our community so that we can all experience this God's economy, because God created everything that we need on earth, and we have a responsibility to make sure it's equally distributed.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Thank you, Sister Moseley.
Yeah, Black Liberation Theology, and I'm going to start with the theology part because theos is God and ology is the study of. And so what I have to look at that and say, what does God say and what does God have to say about our situation as African Americans, people of color, in a land where white supremacy, I don't want to talk about racism because there's some white people that can disqualify themselves and say, I'm not a racist, but you benefit from a system of white supremacy. So whether actively or sitting back benign and just benefiting from the system, you're part of white supremacy. Right. What does God have to say to a people who are oppressed by white supremacy? I believe in a God of justice. I look in the Bible and I see a God that speaks to justice. He got a prophet out of the fields of Tekoa, a shepherd named Amos, to go speak to the people of Israel because their religious leaders were so corrupt and were on the take and oppressing the people that God had to go get somebody that wasn't a preacher, that didn't go to school, that wasn't a part of the group, and tell them, look, I don't care about your religious feast. Your festivals are a stench in my nostrils. Why? Because you oppress the people. He said, let justice roll down like a river. And our God still speaks to justice in this context. When we have the largest prison population on the face of the planet, we have a God that speaks to justice. When we have black bodies that are being electrocuted, we got the death penalty in this country across the South. Texas electrocutes more African American bodies than any other state in the union, and the churches are silent. Black Liberation Theology ought to be speaking to this. We got black women that are being raped and murdered across this country, and the churches are silent, but we have a God that believes in liberation. That's what Liberation Theology says to me. So what are we doing? We gotta go do something.
That's
we
right.
gotta come together.
Yeah, we're doing it right here. Thank you.
Do something. It's time out.
Thank you.
It's time out.
Thank you. Thank you. Wait. Thank you so much. Brother McCorry.
lifestyle for me.
Come
I
on.
consider myself a lifelong student of God and His Word. From as early as I can remember, I have focused on a liberation theology, and that's why I'm grateful that James Cone took the time, Professor Cone, to put something together in writing that we could use. I've read everything that Dr. Cone has ever put out. But when I think about liberation theology, I think about the study of a God who cares about poor folk. I think about the study of a God who cares about suffering folk. I think about the study of a God who cared so much that He doesn't have to use folk with PhDs and THDs that some of us are fortunate to have, but He uses some folk that dropped out of school in the 3rd grade because they had to go work in the fields. For me, liberation theology is about a God who cares as much about the soda bash as He does about what goes on up yonder in Oakwood. It is the study of a God who cares that we have so many folk that are unfairly incarcerated, mistreated, misused, and abused. It is a God who teaches me that if we're going to gather, whether we call it the church, the temple, the mosque, or the synagogue, that cares enough to have job programs going on, that has HIV studies going on in the church house. History ought to be taught about our folk in the church house. We ought to care enough, but we have to understand very quickly that it is about love, and we'll learn that today. But love for me got 2 feet. It's got the foot of charity and the foot of justice. Charity is seen in the story of the man who stopped and helped his stranger friend along the road. But the justice side is having the guts to run and tell Pharaoh to let my people go.
Pastor Johnson.
To echo what has been said down the line, I think that liberation theology starts with the fundamental understanding that God is on the side of the least of these, the lost, the left out, the looked over, the looked past. It starts there. That's the starting point. If liberation theology only stays in the study and in the pulpit, then it does us no good. That's right. There is a practical side to liberation theology as well, particularly Black liberation theology. And so it is that God is on the side of the least of these, the lost, the left out. And God has called me, even from my place of privilege, right? And we have to talk about that because I'm a man, so technically I enjoy male privilege. It's gonna go down the dark road. Even from my place of privilege, to identify with those who are in any situation, the least of these, the lost, and the left out. So it's not just an affirmation that God is on the side of these people, of the marginalized, of the oppressed, but that God has called me to be on the side of the marginalized and the oppressed. Even if it costs my privilege.
Yes.
I hope that makes sense. I'll come back later on. You have 30 seconds back.
Thank you, sir.
Well, you know, you put LeBron James in the game. Then you had Steph Curry, Michael Jordan, and Kobe. Now you're giving me the ball and telling me to perform. You got some heavyweights here, bro. Let's give them a hand. In this book, Message to the Black Man in America, on page 39, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad talks about get knowledge to benefit self. To me, Black liberation theology is exactly that. But the question I would like to raise is, why do we need a Black liberation theology? We need a Black theology because somebody made it white. We need to be liberated because somebody enslaved us.
Right.
In your definition, you said that you know, liberation is to be made free. So we have to raise the question: who made us enslaved so that we would have to be made free? Then another beautiful point you made was that we need a religious system that works.
Yeah.
See, what we have, we know what to do, but we don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So we're doing the right thing, but we're doing it out of order. So to me, the action is, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan said that when the black preacher wakes up, we'll be able to be liberated overnight. When the black politician wakes up, we'll be able to be liberated overnight. So this is more powerful than what we think it is.
Right.
This is a step in that direction. When you have Christians coming together, Muslims coming together, this is action. But I'll close in saying we must have a church without walls, a mosque without walls, and we have to understand that Scripture is filled with similes and metaphor. My brother was talking about the stranger, the man coming down from Jerusalem to Jericho. But as I read that Scripture, Jericho is north of Jerusalem. So how can you go down if it's north unless it's talking about a parable?
Yes, sir.
So we have to understand that Scripture, but we have to get in the streets because our work is in the streets.
Yes, sir.